Once upon a time, in a quiet town surrounded by lush green hills, there lived a young girl named Amarachi. She had once known happiness, laughter, and the warmth of a loving home. But that was before tragedy struck, before the accident that took her parents away and left her with no one but her uncle, Ikenna. Ikenna was her father's older brother, and when Amarachi was left orphaned at the tender age of 13, he took her into his home. But he never treated her as family. From the very first day, he made it clear that she was a burden, an extra mouth to feed. His wife, Adebisi, was no better. She was cold and unkind, treating Amarachi as nothing more than a servant in their household. Their daughter, Omalara, was the light of their lives. She was spoiled with the finest clothes, the best toys, and all the love and attention Amarachi never received. Every time Ikenna and Adebisi brought gifts home, they were for Omalara. Every time they cooked special meals, they were for Omalara. Amarachi was given only scraps, old clothes, and harsh words. Omalara, who was younger than Amarachi, never missed an opportunity to remind her that she was not truly part of the family. She treated Amarachi like a servant, sending her to do even the smallest tasks. If Omalara needed a glass of water, she would call Amarachi instead of getting it herself. If she misplaced something, it was Amarachi who had to search for it. There was never a moment when Amarachi was not being ordered around, and no matter how tired she had no choice but to obey. What made it worse was that every time there was even a slight misunderstanding between them, Mama Adebisi would always take Omalara's side without question. She never bothered to ask Amarachi for her version of the story. It didn't matter whether Amarachi was right or wrong. Omalara was her daughter, and that was enough reason for her to be defended. Omalara was allowed to do whatever she pleased. If she was lazy, no one scolded her. If she misbehaved, it was brushed aside. But Amarachi? No matter how well she behaved, no matter how hard she worked, there was always something negative they had to say about her. It was as if they were always searching for faults, just so they could remind her that she didn't belong. But despite all of this, Amarachi endured. She had nowhere else to go, and as painful as it was, she reminded herself that Ikenna and Adebisi were the only family she had left, and no matter how cruelly she was treated, at least she had a roof over her head. At least she wasn't living on the streets. So she swallowed the pain, endured the mistreatment, and kept going. But everything changed the day Ikenna's debt came due. Ikenna had borrowed a large sum of money from a man named Olamide. Olamide was not just any man. He was the wealthiest and most feared businessman in the town. He was young, powerful, and ruthless. If anyone crossed him, he would destroy them. He had sent men to prison, ruined families, and taken over businesses without a second thought. Everyone feared him, and no one dared to owe him money. But Ikenna had been desperate. His business was failing, and he had convinced himself that with Olamide's money, he could turn things around. He had promised to repay the debt in a few months. But months had passed, and Ikenna had not made enough to pay even half of what he owed. Then one evening, Olamide came to collect what was his. He arrived at Ikenna's house in a sleek black car, his guards surrounding the compound like shadows in the night. He stepped out, his presence commanding and terrifying. "You have failed to repay me," Olamide said, his voice calm but deadly. "And I do not tolerate failure." Ikenna fell to his knees, his hands shaking. "Please, Olamide, give me more time. I just need a little more." Olamide raised a hand, silencing him. "I do not give second chances. Since you cannot pay me, I will take something of equal value." He turned to his guards and gestured toward Omalara. "Take that girl!" Omalara screamed, clutching her mother. "No! Father, don't let them take me!" Adebisi wailed, shielding her daughter. "Please, Olamide, there must be another way." Ikenna, desperate to save Omalara, made a choice that would change Amarachi's life forever. "Take Amarachi instead!" he blurted out. Amarachi's heart stopped. Olamide raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "My eldest daughter," Ikenna lied. "She is strong and hardworking. She will serve you well." Olamide studied Amarachi for a moment. Then he smirked. Fine, take her. Before Amarachi could protest, two of Olamide's guards grabbed her by the arms. No, please, she cried. Uncle, don't do this. But Ikenna and Adebisi turned away. They refused to look at her. To them, this was a blessing. Olamide had taken Amarachi instead of Omalara. That meant they didn't have to repay the debt. It meant they were free. As the guards dragged her toward Olamide's car, Amarachi looked back one last time, hoping for mercy. But she saw none. Tears welled in her eyes. Her only family had sold her off without hesitation. And just like that, her fate was sealed. The ride to Olamide's estate was silent. Amarachi sat in the back of the car, her hands trembling. She had heard stories about Olamide, how he was heartless, how he destroyed lives without blinking. What would he do to her? The car stopped in front of a massive mansion with towering gates and armed guards. The gates opened slowly, and Amarachi was led inside. The house was grand: marble floors, gold chandeliers, walls decorated with expensive paintings. But there was no warmth, no love, only cold luxury. Olamide turned to her, his sharp eyes gleaming. You belong to me now, he said. You will do as I say, or you will suffer. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Olamide smirked. Your father gave you to me to repay his debt, and until he does, you are mine. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight. But what could she do? For the first time in years, Amarachi let the tears fall. But deep in her heart, something burned. She would survive this. She had to. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Amarachi, despite her difficult circumstances, refused to break. She worked diligently, never complaining, never showing resentment. The other maids whispered about her behind her back, mocking her for how seriously she took her work, but she ignored them. She woke up earlier than everyone else and worked harder than anyone in the mansion. Whether it was cleaning, washing, or running errands, she did it all with quiet determination. But her greatest skill was in the kitchen. One day, the household's chief cook fell ill, and the kitchen was in chaos. Lunch needed to be prepared, and no one knew what to do. Seeing the struggle, Amarachi stepped forward and offered to cook. The other maids laughed, but she ignored them. She rolled up her sleeves and prepared a meal. When the food was served, Olamide, as usual, sat at the head of the grand dining table. He took his first bite, expecting just another ordinary meal. But the moment the flavors touched his tongue, he paused. He chewed slowly, his face unreadable. Then he took another bite, and another. The entire dining hall fell silent. Who cooked this? He finally asked. The chief of maids, nervous under his gaze, stepped forward. It was Amarachi, sir. Olamide leaned back in his chair, staring at her. You? A mere housemaid? Amarachi lowered her gaze. Yes, sir. He studied her for a moment before speaking again. From now on, you will be the one to prepare my meals. That is your only duty in this house. You will no longer do any other chores. A murmur spread among the maids. Amarachi was shocked, but nodded respectfully. And one more thing, Olamide continued. You will move into the guest room in the main house. You will take care of my personal meals and ensure everything concerning my food is handled by you alone. And just like that, Amarachi's life changed. From that day forward, she no longer scrubbed floors or washed clothes. She focused solely on preparing meals for Olamide. When Amarachi moved into the main house and settled into the guest room, she began witnessing his way of life, the side of Olamide that made people fear and whisper about him in the town. She saw how he treated relationships as nothing more than fleeting pleasures. Women came and went, never staying for more than a few nights. He changed them like clothes, showing no commitment to any one of them. Every time he brought a different woman home, Amarachi felt a quiet sadness inside her. She never said anything, nor did she show any disapproval on her face. It was not her place to question how he lived his life. She simply continued with her work, preparing his meals and ensuring that his personal matters were taken care of. But deep inside, she couldn't help but think that this was not a good way of living. She believed that a man of such status and intelligence should find something deeper than temporary pleasures, but she kept those thoughts to herself. She simply observed in silence. At first, he would only speak to her about food, what he liked, what he wanted to try. But soon, their conversations grew. He began asking about her thoughts on different matters. He observed how she carried herself, humble yet graceful, quiet yet intelligent. One evening, as she cleared his table, he suddenly asked, "Why hasn't Ikenna tried to get you back?" Amarachi froze, her hands gripping the tray. Olamide continued, "I thought taking you away would force him to repay me faster. But he hasn't even reached out." "Why?" A bitter smile crossed Amarachi's face. She hesitated before finally speaking, "Because he is not my father." Olamide narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Taking a deep breath, Amarachi told him everything, how she had lost her parents, how Ikenna had taken her in but never treated her as family, how she had been nothing more than a servant in his household, and how he had willingly given her away to Olumide to save his own daughter. For the first time, Olumide felt something unfamiliar: guilt. He had assumed she was Ikenna's daughter, that taking her would push Ikenna to pay back the money. But now he saw the truth. Ikenna had given her away because she meant nothing to him. Olumide said nothing, but that night, he found himself thinking about Amarachi more than he had ever thought about anyone before. One day, Olumide was troubled by a problem in his business. He was deep in thought, pacing back and forth in his study. Amarachi noticed his distress and hesitated before asking, "Sir, is something wrong?" He was about to dismiss her, but something in her eyes made him pause. Without thinking, he told her about the issue, a dispute between two of his business partners that threatened to ruin an important deal. Amarachi listened carefully and then, in her usual soft-spoken manner, offered her perspective. She spoke with such clarity and wisdom that Olumide was stunned. He followed her advice, and to his surprise, it worked. For the first time, he saw Amarachi not just as a maid, but as someone truly remarkable. After that day, their conversations grew deeper. He sought her thoughts on many things, from business to personal matters. He found himself drawn to her intelligence, her kindness, her quiet strength, and then something happened that he never expected. He started to feel something for her. Olamide had never been the type to commit to any woman. He took what he wanted, enjoyed their company, and then moved on. But with Amarachi, it was different. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't try to seduce him. She was simply herself, and that was what captivated him the most. But he was afraid. He had never felt this way before. One day, after an unusually long silence during dinner, Olumide put down his fork and looked at Amarachi. "You are not a prisoner, Amarachi," he said unexpectedly. She looked up at him, confused. "You have been here long enough," he continued. "You have done your part, and I will not keep you locked in this house like a caged bird. If you wish to go out, see the town, meet people, live your life, you are free to do so." Amarachi was stunned. She had never expected such words from him. She hesitated before nodding. "Thank you, sir." He waved a hand dismissively. "And stop calling me sir. Just call me Olamide." Amarachi smiled a little, though she wasn't sure she could ever get used to that. With this newfound freedom, Amarachi slowly started stepping outside the mansion. At first, she only took short walks around the area, getting familiar with the town. Then she started going to the market herself instead of sending one of the servants. She began to interact with people, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like a person again, not just a servant. And then, one day, everything changed. She met someone. It happened at a small fabric shop in the marketplace. She was admiring some colorful materials when a man approached her. He was polite, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in talking to her. They spoke for a while, and he asked if he could see her again. Amarachi was hesitant at first, but something about him felt safe. And so, she agreed. Over the next few weeks, she met with him occasionally. He was kind and respectful, and for the first time in her life, someone was looking at her as more than just a burden or a servant. One evening, as she served Olumide his dinner, she decided to tell him, "I have met someone," she said softly. Olumide, who had just taken a sip of his drink, paused. He slowly set down his glass and looked at her. "What do you mean?" His voice was calm, but something in his eyes changed. Amarachi hesitated, then continued. "A man. He is kind. He wants to court me." A heavy silence filled the room. Olumide didn't speak for a long time. He simply sat there, staring at his plate, though he was no longer eating. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "And do you like him?" Amarachi hesitated. I think he is a good man." Olumide clenched his jaw. His grip tightened on his fork, though he didn't realize it. "And do you have feelings for him?" he asked, his voice quieter this time. Amarachi opened her mouth to answer, but she wasn't sure how to. She had never been in love before, never even thought about relationships. She had been too busy surviving. "I don't know," she admitted. Olumide's eyes darkened. He was quiet for the rest of the meal. For days after that conversation, Olumide was different. He was quieter, more distant. He barely spoke to Amarachi unless it was necessary, and even when he did, his usual warmth toward her was gone. She noticed it, but didn't understand why. One evening, as she cleared his table, he suddenly spoke. "Do you want to be with him?" She turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "What?" "This man," Olumide said, his voice a little rough. "Do you want to be with him?" Amarachi hesitated. "I don't know." Olumide exhaled sharply and stood up. He ran a hand through his hair, as if struggling with something. Then, before she could ask what was wrong, he turned to her and said something that shocked her to the core. "I don't want you to be with him." Amarachi's eyes widened. "What?" Olumide stepped closer. "Because I have feelings for you, Amarachi, and I don't want to lose you to another man." She stared at him, stunned. She had never imagined that Olumide, the cold, arrogant, untouchable Olumide, could ever feel something like love. But why?" she stammered. He let out a breath and rubbed his face. "I don't know how or when it happened. I only know that I can't stand the thought of you with someone else." Amarachi felt her heart pounding. She had never allowed herself to think about Olumide in that way. He had always been her master, her rescuer, but never anything more. But as she looked at him now, something shifted inside her. Hadn't she always felt a strange warmth whenever he was near? Hadn't she always admired him, even when he was cruel? Hadn't she always felt safe in his presence? Slowly, she realized the truth. She had feelings for him too, but she couldn't ignore the concerns weighing on her heart. She had witnessed his past lifestyle, the way he brought different women into the house, changing them like clothes. Though she had noticed that he had stopped doing that for some time, she still worried that it might only be temporary. She didn't want to get hurt or be just another woman in his life. So, with hesitation, she voiced her concerns to him. She asked him if he had truly changed, or if she was just another passing fancy to him. Olumide listened to her words carefully, and instead of getting angry or dismissing her fears, he reassured her. He told her that he had indeed changed, and that he had stopped that lifestyle completely. He had no other woman in his life, and he wasn't interested in anyone else. What he felt for Amarachi was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. "For the first time in my life, I truly care about someone," he admitted. "I don't just want you, Amarachi. I need you in my life. You've changed me in ways I never thought possible." Hearing those words and seeing the sincerity in his eyes, Amarachi felt her heart soften. She had always believed that people could change, and Olumide's actions in the past few months had shown her that he was different now. So, with cautious hope, she decided to give him a chance. And from that moment on, everything changed between them. Once their feelings were out in the open, Amarachi and Olamide began a relationship. At first, it was strange for both of them. Olamide had never truly loved anyone before, and Amarachi had never imagined herself in such a position. But over time, their bond deepened, and everything felt natural. Amarachi brought out a softer side of Olumide that no one had ever seen. He no longer sought comfort in meaningless relationships with women he didn't care about. Instead, he found peace in Amarachi's presence. He valued her wisdom, her kindness, and her ability to calm him when he was troubled. In return, Amarachi felt secure and loved for the first time in her life. Months passed, and everything was perfect between them. But Olumide knew there was still one thing left to do. He had to make things official. One evening, after dinner, he took Amarachi's hands in his and said, "It's time I go to Ikena. He is your only family, and I want to marry you properly." Amarachi hesitated, knowing how Ikena had treated her in the past. "He will not be happy about it," she said softly. Olumide smiled. "That's not my problem. I am not going there to ask for permission. I am going there to inform him that I will marry you." A few days later, Olumide traveled to meet Ikena. As expected, Ikena was not pleased to see him. And when Olumide stated his intentions, Ikena's expression darkened. "You want to marry Amarachi?" Ikena asked, clearly displeased. "Yes," Olumide responded firmly. Ikena shook his head and leaned back. "When you first came here, you wanted Omolara. Now you are saying you want Amarachi?" Olumide's jaw tightened. "That day, I was here to take someone as a prisoner, not a wife. I did not come to pick a woman to marry. What I said about Omolara was a random remark. But today, I am here as a man who loves Amarachi and wants to make her my wife. I do not know Omolara. I do not love Omolara. I will only marry Amarachi." Ikena's expression hardened. He did not want to give Amarachi to Olumide, but he also feared what Olumide could do. The man was powerful, and refusing him could have consequences. In the end, he had no choice. Reluctantly, he agreed, though it was clear he was not happy about it. However, as he gave his approval, his resentment boiled over. He turned to Amarachi and accused her bitterly. "So this is what you planned all along," he spat. "Stealing my daughter's man. You took what should have been Omolara's." Amarachi was stunned. "I did no such thing," she said, shaking her head. "Olumide chose me, not the other way around." But Ikena was not interested in hearing the truth. He was furious, and Amarachi could see that no matter what she said, he would blame her. Meanwhile, Adebisi was seething with rage. How could Olumide choose Amarachi over Omolara? She turned on Ikena in anger. "The day Olumide came to take Omolara, why didn't you let her go?" she snapped. Ikena glared at her. "How was I supposed to know it would turn into love and marriage?" he shot back. "And don't forget, you were not happy about Omolara leaving that day either. That's why we gave him Amarachi instead." Adebisi fumed, but Ikena continued, his voice dropping into a more thoughtful tone. "Besides," he muttered, "if we are being honest, with the way Omolara behaves, do you really think she would have turned this into love? Omolara would never have captured his heart." Adebisi fell silent. Deep down, she knew Ikena was right. Meanwhile, Amarachi and Olumide returned home and prepared for their wedding. Unlike the cold and painful past she had endured, this was the beginning of a new, beautiful life. Amarachi was finally happy, living her best life with someone who valued and cherished her. And Olumide, once a ruthless and distant man, had changed completely. Amarachi had brought out the best in him, teaching him patience, kindness, and love. As time passed, Ikena and Adebisi suffered in silence. Their lives became filled with hardships, and for all their pride, they could not even ask Amarachi for help. They were ashamed, not only because of the difficult situations they faced, but also because they knew, deep down, that they had mistreated Amarachi. And yet, despite their cruelty, she was now the one with the power and the love they had once denied her. And so, Amarachi and Illumidi lived happily, proving that true love and kindness would always triumph in the end. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, comment, and share the video. Also, please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you won't miss our next video. Bye!